All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Blaine Griffin. I am the council person for the Ward 6 area of the city of Cleveland. I'm also the majority whip for Cleveland City Council, and I am also the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. Today we're here because we want to basically say thank you to the community for supporting the resolution that we passed this week, Resolution 296-2020. And it states and it declares that racism is a public health crisis. It is truly a sobering moment in the city of Cleveland at this time, when all of us are forced to reflect on how did we get here? How did the city get to a point where so many people are frustrated and passionate about reform? But that reform is not just what's needed in the police department. Racism exists in all of the systems that we have across this city. It has caused health disparities. It has caused economic disparities. It has caused disparities in the amount of affordable and quality housing that we have in the city of Cleveland. And yes, it is also a civil rights issue, and it is also a public health crisis. So we stand today because after 400 years, after Jim Crow laws, after redlining, after policies that have held a certain community, in this case, African American community, back, where we have higher rates of infant mortality, we as a city council have used the voice of one of the most powerful institutions in the city of Cleveland, Cleveland City Hall, to state that racism is a public health crisis. So here today you see internal and external partners that are working with us. You also have had several statements from the Greater Cleveland Partnership, which is our Chamber of Commerce, all of the major medical institutions like Cleveland Clinic, University Hospitals, Metro, the school districts, a lot of the educational institutions like Tri-C, and several of our corporate citizens and street club presidents from all over the city have stated that we want to address this issue of racism, which is what we believe is the root cause of so many of these social inequalities. So that being said, it is my duty to bring up the councilman, the council president for Cleveland City Council, who through his leadership and his support, we were able to push this through and get a unanimous vote to state that racism is a public health crisis in the city of Cleveland. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilman Griffin, and thanks for your leadership on this and everything that you did to make this a reality. Anybody who would suggest that race is not part of our health outcomes is living in a state of willful ignorance. If you look at heart disease, diabetes, infant mortality, lead poisoning, and yes, homicides and other social illnesses, the link between race and health outcomes cannot be denied. In fact, it's been before us for longer than we should be embarrassed to admit. Back in 2001, it became a federal issue, and in 2003, Congress mandated that we produce a national health disparities report. Well, that was 2001 and 2003. Well, now it's 2020. That's why I'm glad the Cleveland City Council finally said enough. We're going to stop talking about this. We're going to stop letting this just happen without your government, your city, having an effective response to this. But to be successful, we are going to need government, we are going to need the private sector, we're going to need the philanthropic sector, we're going to need everybody to stop denying that this is not an issue in health outcomes. We're going to need to tackle this head on, and everybody's going to have to do that together. The most heartening question that came from many people during all of our discussions of racism and health as a public health crisis is, what are we going to do? Is this just going to be another resolution that the City Council passes, or is this going to be a call to action? I'm here to tell you this is going to be action. We are required to put together a working group, to put together a plan, to put together policies to make sure that this is not just something that Council was resolved to do. This is something we are going to do. We are going to have a plan, and I'm not talking about in 2021, I'm not talking about in 2022. We're going to start working on this immediately because we are long overdue. on recognizing this and acting on this. So again, thank you everyone that's here. Thanks my colleagues. I have this Wednesday, even though we were in a Zoom meeting, which was kind of a Zoom meeting, one of my proudest moments on council when we passed this, because we really came together and did something good, not just for a ward or for a small item. We're taking a look at how are we as a city going to care for our people going forward. So I'm very proud to say that. And one of our main sponsors of this is my colleague, Councilman Kerry McCormick, who's been very helpful in pushing this forward. And at this point, I'd like to introduce my friend and my colleague, Ward 3, Councilman Kerry McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Council President. I'm also a proud co-sponsor of this ordinance declaring racism as a public health crisis. As the Council President just noted, there's a lot of work that we've been taking on as a council and a lot of work ahead of us. But we can't fool ourselves that laws or work in our community is going to rid our society of systemic racism by itself. There are folks in our community that from the very beginning of this country have had to walk through society understanding very acutely what it means to live through systemic racism. There are folks in our community that have had to see the consequences on themselves, their friends, and their families of what it means to live with societal racism, with systematic racism. And then there are folks in our community that look like me, that have not had to walk through their day-to-day lives with these impacts on themselves, on their families, and on their communities. No, this is not an opportunity to shame people. That's not what I'm calling for. What I would call for, and what all of my colleagues in the community would call for, is moving forward in a time of empathy, in real empathy. Moving forward in the days ahead of a time of listening and elevating voices that have been suppressed in the history of our country and our city. Now is a time to walk forward, understanding, doing our best to understand what others in our community have lived with since the very beginning of our country. Once we work to understand fully, to listen, to elevate other voices, we will begin to change the hearts and minds of people in Cleveland and across America. And in addition to the laws and the policies that need to happen, from living room to living room to living room, to boardrooms, to family gatherings, we will change people's hearts, we will change people's minds, and we will make this a better country and a better city. Thank you. I have the high honor, actually, of introducing our next speaker, my co-colleague here in downtown and for a major part of the city. Bashir Jones has been an advocate from the very beginning, way before, but since I've gotten to know him on city council, he is the real deal. He talks the talks, he walks the walks, he feels what is going on in his community on a day-to-day basis in his heart and in his core. Bashir has been pushing for this declaration from day one, and he's been pushing for the changes that we all need to see in our community. Councilman Jones is a leader on so many issues and one of our strongest voices on this issue of declaring racism as a public health crisis. So if I could welcome up Councilman Jones.
First and foremost, we thank the Creator, man, for this very special day. And this is what it's all about. And I was always wondering, how do we turn activism into legislative policy? And to see this, to stand with Chairman Griffin and Council President and my very good friend, man, Councilman McCormick and Councilman Bishop and all of the council on this is a very beautiful thing. I want to say that this can't just be, and we're going to make sure that this is not just a document, a piece of paper. I can guarantee you that. But it's going to take for the community and all of us to ensure that what we're saying we will do. We have to look at the city of Cleveland and ask ourselves, have we been a part of the problem? How have we been doing business? This is a major problem as we look at our safety forces, and it doesn't even come close to represent the demographics of the city. What I'm calling for as a city is that we need to come up with a plan, a serious plan, on how we plan to diversify the safety forces, not just in talk, but in action. I'm calling for every single institution in the city, whether you're a bank or you're a foundation or you are whatever, for a couple of things. One, we need to see more diversity in upper management. If you don't have diversity in upper management, then as a city, we don't need to do business with you. A bank, we're not talking about secure credit cards, but for the banks who are in this city, we need to see more of an investment in the community, and if not, we are going to come up with a plan as city council to disinvest from you. The foundations, we want to see more diversity in upper management and more investment into the community. If we don't do that, we can't continue to shame those who have been victimized by structural racism. We can't put it on the victim's back. I get tired of having conversations with young black boys about how they should approach the police. No, the conversation is with the police or how they are supposed to approach young black boys. This is very important. We should not have to teach our community how to deal with police, while at the same time we have to teach police how to deal with our community. And if we do not do that, then it just becomes talk. And then the riots will continue. The destruction will continue. Because the destruction is not just in the form of glass and buildings, but we are destroying the very morale of the people of Cleveland. If we're going to increase our population, this city must be a city that is open to all people, not just in words, but in action. We want to see a more diverse police department, and we want to hear a plan from the administration on how that will be accomplished. We want to see more diversity in the fire department and EMS and so forth and so on. And in the city, it's good that we have African Americans who are working in the city, but let's look at the percentage of upper management. It's a different percentage. If we're going to achieve our goals, it can't just be words. It got to be action. I can tell you right now, we like the Avengers up here, you know. I don't know if you've ever seen Marvel. And we're coming together. This is not black versus white. This is everybody versus racist. And once we understand that and get that clearly, then we'll begin to achieve our goal. Thank you so much to the council president. Thank you so much to Chairman Griffin, to Councilman Bishop, to my good friend Councilman McCormick, and every other council person. Thank you to the mayor for continuing to preach equity. And now it's time that we come together and work with these amazing groups who are here to ensure that what we are saying becomes action, because it's about these children right here. It's about them making sure that they have a better Cleveland than we receive. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Marcia Maccabee, President and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Cleveland. I'm indeed honored to stand here with Councilman Blaine Griffin and all Councilman Kelly, lead of City Council, all of the others, Councilman Jones, my own councilman over there, Councilman Bishop, and others, and all of the organizations that you see here together. This is what collaboration looks like. And this is what it's going to take in order to move from a piece of paper to creating a mosaic of action and improved outcomes for the city of Cleveland. People ask me, why now? It's a watershed moment. Why is it a watershed moment? Because there's a convergence of unrest across multiple systems. There's a great focus of attention right now on the public safety system because of what has happened to Mr. Floyd and the others whose names are in the news that we call on a daily basis. The justice system itself. Is there one form of justice for one group and another form of justice for others? There are lots of questions swirling around that system. And COVID-19 certainly shined the light on the disparities in the economic and workforce systems and also health care. So it creates a watershed moment. A second reason is there is a growing concern with the federal government's response to issues of race. You have but to turn on your TV and you understand and know what I'm talking about. Then there is this other special moment in time when not only are the words, "I can't breathe," being spoken nationally and internationally. And during the civil rights movement, it is when brothers and sisters across the world began to understand the plight of African Americans in this country and cried out with the same fervor about the indignation and the things that we were suffering, that locally at home, people started to pay attention. And we see that very thing happening again right now. I don't know how many of you have gotten phone calls, but I've probably fielded dozens over the last week of people saying, "What can I do?" And I've been praying for an answer that has both wisdom, compassion, and the same grace that I want people to meet this particular moment. So what I'm saying to people is, this is a moment of introspection. This is a time to search our consciences, search our institutions, search our family history, search our cultures, and look for any signs of racism that may be there. But beyond that, the courage that when we find and if we find something ugly that we may not even have suspected to find, that we have the courage to be willing to transform. This particular piece of legislation gives us just a starting point to develop plans to dismantle the racism that exists in institutions across our country. And I know that everyone is looking to those who have been involved with this to give some guidance and direction on that. We're praying for wisdom as we move. We intend collaboration, and we absolutely will refuse to let this just be a document that sits on the shelf that you can hold us accountable for.
Take off my armor here for a minute. My name is Danielle Sidnor. I'm the president for the Cleveland branch of the NAACP, and I just want to say thank you to all of our elected officials that are here today that fought alongside of us to be able to make this a reality. I'll be very brief in just saying that you cannot solve a problem if you don't identify that problem. And so calling racism a public health crisis is a simple, basic tenet in trying to have problem resolution. We spend a lot of time in our community dealing with things that are symptoms of a problem that we previously refused to identify. When we think about violence, when you think about lack of access to affordable housing, to health care, to quality education, to opportunities when it comes to employment and business ownership, the one common thread and the one common thing that bands all those things together is systemic racism. And by declaring this as a public health crisis, it requires our legislators to put together legislation that's going to solve the problems. It also voluntarily allows our corporate and civic community to come together and say, we identify this as a problem as well, and we want to lock arms with you to create solutions. As a Black woman who leads in this community, it's disheartening to know that in almost every single poll and study that's out there, Black women fare worse and at the bottom in the city of Cleveland when you talk about education outcomes, business, health, and some of my colleagues are going to talk specifically about maternal health and infant mortality. But I live this on a day-to-day basis, and so that's why I'm proud to be a part of the group that was willing to name this as a crisis, but I'm also optimistic and encouraged by the community response that we realize we won't do this by ourselves. We are a mighty team of Avengers, as my brother has just so eloquently stated, but we need more Avengers on this stage with us to ensure that this problem is eradicated, not only in the city of Cleveland, but in this region, in the state, and across the country and the world. Thank you so much, and next I'll introduce my colleague from Birthing Beautiful Communities, Kristen Farmer.
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon. As Danielle said, my name is Kristen Farmer, and I represent Birthing Beautiful Communities, which is a perinatal support organization, and we combat Black infant mortality within our city. So I'm gonna be honest, when I heard that this resolution was on the table, I agree with almost everything my brother Bashir does and what he says, but I was a little skeptical. But I had very reason to be skeptical. As I just recently stated on Facebook, the last time a city, Milwaukee, declared racism as a public health crisis, they called me and asked me for my intellectual property for free. So I want us to be very clear about not only is racism a public health issue, but it's a human rights issue. So this is stemming down from federal to state to county to city here on the local level, where over half of our residents in this city are Black people. And the babies that die in this city, in Cleveland, has one of the highest Black infant mortality rates in the country. Racism is real. Toxic stress is real. Health is not just about what we are eating. Health is also about what we are thinking and what we are feeling. And if we are constantly being policed, not just by the people who have badges, but just people in general who feel the need to police our work, to police our money, to police us going to parks, to barbecuing, to just camaraderie with our friends. Don't even know if that's a word, but y'all get me, right? The point is, if we are going to say that this is a public health issue and that we are taking this serious, then I'm holding people accountable. Because my work depends on saving the lives of Black babies every day. I can't afford for people to not be held accountable. I'm watching this day in and day out. Our Black mothers are fearful of birthing baby boys into this world. We can't forget about our history because it disallows us to figure out what we will be doing moving in the future. We cannot solve problems with the same thinking that was used to create them. And so we have to take a totally different approach. So we can say that racism is a public health crisis, but we have to address what's happening within our schools, within our neighborhoods. One neighborhood is not more important than any other neighborhood in this city. There's no difference from downtown to Glenville to Ohio City to Central to Tremont to Huff. If we're talking about equity, we need to really be talking about what equity means and allowing for people to not have foot on their necks. We deserve to breathe. We deserve to live in the quality of life. This is our city too. Yes, we do deserve to be in leadership. And a lot of our Black leaders have walked away from their leadership positions in institutions. Why? Because of the feeling of unfairness and inequality. It's one thing to say something, but it's another thing to take action. And I'm ready for action. And I've been ready for action. So I'm happy that we are here at this point. But as I said, I will be watching because I have to hold myself accountable. I have to look at my 100% Black staff every day to ensure, as they look at me as a leader, that I am fighting on the front line for the rights of them and for the rights of our unborn babies. And the babies that we have here, that we have the responsibility of taking care of, and I intend to uphold my truth and my oath as a Black leader in the community to see that through. Thank you. To Margaret Mitchell from the YWCA.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Council President Kelly. Thank you, Councilman Griffin. Thank you, Councilman Jones and McCormick. My name is Margaret Mitchell, and I'm President and CEO for the YWCA of Greater Cleveland. We began on this journey a year ago in 2019 when we marked the commemoration of 400 years since the commercial end of slavery. We commemorated that here in Cleveland, thanks to the mayor and Chief Minor, with a summit right here. Over 500 people attended our two-day summit commemorating the 400 years of inequity in our country. It was not an event, it was a moment to begin to look forward to declare racism a public health crisis. We began in 2019 to build a coalition of consciousness, and I thank First Year Cleveland, Birthing Beautiful, the NAACP, United Way, and the Urban League for being part of that coalition of consciousness. And then there was the city council, who had the courage and the fortitude against hate and dissent to pick this banner up and carry it forward. There is much to do. 400 years of slavery and a slave mentality that persists today will activate itself against us and against this work in the coming days. Earlier this year, I was in Alabama to do the Civil Rights Trail. I was in Birmingham, Selma, and Montgomery. And as I stood in the 16th Street Baptist Church, where 4 little girls were murdered on Youth Sunday, all friends, all girls gathered in the bathroom of the Sunday school, when 30 sticks of dynamite annihilated them. It took 38 years to bring 2 men who were known to every single police officer on that fateful day in September. 38 years to bring them to justice. As I stood in the 16th Street Baptist Church in 2020, I asked myself one question. Will more blood be required in order to advance our work? And now we know. Now we know. We call on our cities in Akron and Cincinnati and Youngstown and Toledo to join us in this work to bear against 400 years. It's time. It's time. And now it is my great honor to be able to introduce from the United Way, who stood first and foremost when so many other leaders were not willing to hear or understand what this was all about. It is my pleasure to introduce Helen Forbes, Executive Vice President and General Counsel for United Way of Greater Cleveland.
Thank you, Margaret, and good afternoon to everyone. It's my distinct pleasure to be here on behalf of United Way of Greater Cleveland and stand with our nonprofit partners, City Council, Councilman Blaine Griffin, and Council President Kevin Kelly, and the other members of Council on this most important action that has just occurred. Today, let's make no mistake that this step is significant in our city's fight against racism and against poverty. At United Way, we have been steadfast in making that connection between racism and poverty in terms of the plight that we are facing in the city of Cleveland. Combating racism for United Way is part of our core mission, and it's part of the work that we do every day to serve those that are most in need in our community. As an organization and as a community, we cannot ignore the racism when we talk about poverty, that racism exists. Our city now bears the title of being the worst in the nation among major U.S. cities for childhood poverty, second worst for working age adult poverty, and third worst for senior poverty. Our statistics are staggering, and I know that we all agree that they are unacceptable. This week, the declaration that racism is a public health crisis helps to move Cleveland forward in the right direction, a direction which we would encourage for all cities in Ohio and all United Ways to stand in the fight for this declaration as well. Our work to create social justice and racial equity within Cleveland is just beginning. We know that racism is systemic in our institutions, in our city, and across our nation, as Blaine mentioned, in housing, education, healthcare, and in criminal justice, and certainly the list goes on. So that's why I'm pleased to be an ally with many that are standing here today to fight this fight. Again, we thank Councilman Griffin and the City Council to advance this declaration. And as he pointed out, this cannot be just words on paper. Personally, I've known that racism is a public health crisis for my 60 years. We can no longer fight this fight in fits and starts. It must be consistent, and I pledge that United Way will be here to fight this battle along with our partners in the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Helen. One other person that has been very instrumental in this conversation, and she's here representing the administration, is Chief Natoya Minor Walker, and then we'll take any questions anybody has. Chief.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I, too, am happy to stand here with all of the partners on what we are calling history in the making by making this declaration. On New Year's Eve of 2019, on the dawn of 2020, whether you were in a church service or at a party or wherever you were, the overwhelming thing was 2020 will be the year of 2020, the vision 2020. So it's no accident that breath and breathing, COVID and racism have collided. It's no accident. We are 157 years from the Emancipation Proclamation. We are 157 years of systemic racism and policies that have disproportionately impacted communities of color. Now is the time. Now is the time. We've known for a long time. 30 years ago in the Reagan administration, the Heckler Report, for which Dr. Lewis Sullivan and David Satcher, both Morehouse men, were a part of creating Minority Health Month in this country. Prior to, we had never had any reports about racism and poverty and its implications on people of color, on Black people. So today I stand here as a representative of Mayor Jackson in conversation with Mayor Jackson as we push forward on equity, an equity agenda for all people, an equity agenda for Black and brown people, so that we too can be the benefactors of what is in the United States Constitution in the preamble, so that we can have liberty, justice, and equality for all. And that's what racism as a public health crisis is all about. That's what it's about. It's pushing for what we too are entitled to as Americans in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Walker Minor. Just before we take any questions, I do have one more person I want to acknowledge, and I know we have Jasmine Long, if she could raise her hand, and then we have Catrice Kane. Catrice Kane is with First Year Cleveland, and I don't see Bernie Kerrigan here, but I do want to have First Year Cleveland and Catrice say something.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Councilman Griffin. My name is Catrice Kane. I'm the Racial Disparities and Health Equity Program Director for First Year Cleveland. I will be very brief because I echo what the councilman said and our partners here today. I come before you speaking on behalf of those who are unspoken, and that's our babies. Our babies are dying in Cleveland, as Kristen Farmer Kane mentioned. That is a problem. Infant mortality is an indicator of the health and wellness of our community. So if we have the highest infant mortality rate, one of the highest infant mortality rates in the United States, what does that say about Cleveland? What does that say about Cuyahoga County? We need to do better. In silence and inaction perpetuate racism. So I've been on social media, I've checked my emails, I've looked on TV, I've seen the posts, I've seen the Blackout Tuesday, I've seen the statements from organizations supporting this declaration. My question to you is, what will your role be? Where is your action? Where is your true action to support this? A statement is not enough. A piece of paper is not enough. An email is not enough. Too many black babies, black women, and black men are dying every single day. And we are walking around as if nothing is happening. So I encourage you that when you leave from here, to figure out what role you will play, when you will play it, how you will play it, and make sure that it's actionable and it's strategic and it's intentional to make sure that everybody has a right to have equal rights, that all of our babies can live to see a first birthday, that black men and black women do not have to worry about dying when they go to healthcare systems or walking down the street or doing day-to-day business as usual. I thank you for this time, and I hope my words resonate with you in your hearts and minds. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catrice. All right, we'll take any questions that anybody has at this time. I see Harry first.
Yes, sir. Councilman, if you could give us 2 or 3 bullet points about this resolution so that we can be clear of what is contained in the resolution.
Number one, we're basically making a declaration that racism is a public health crisis. As many of the folks here said, you first have to acknowledge something before you actually do something about it. So we're using CDC principles. We're using public health principles that basically says if you did make a declaration for something to be a public health crisis, then you now have to look at what remedies you need to put in place in order to protect the public health of individuals and groups in our community. We also have several people that will be part of a working commission to really work on this. I know you heard my colleague, Councilman Jones, talk about other subject matter experts and trying to put together a equity commission to bring experts that could really help us set up metrics and other things so that we can see what we want to accomplish. So this is a first bold step. Other organizations and corporations throughout Cleveland have also made this statement, and we're going to all look at trying to push that forward. Anybody else? Sure.
And also, as Chairman Griffin talked about, and our sister just said, which is very important, is that we also want to see other organizations create specific action steps of what they're going to do to begin to become more equitable. And that's what we're calling on as well. And I want to make sure that I say this, because the community will always be upset and angry when you have situations like Desmond Franklin, a young boy who was recently shot and killed, and officers have not been brought to the table. We have to do these type of things. So every organization, along with what Chairman Griffin said, Mr. Boomer, is that we are expecting organizations to not just send emails, not just say that we're with you, but we want to see some action steps from Cleveland Clinic, from Metro, from University Hospital, from Key Bank, from every other bank. What are the actionable steps that you will put in place to increase people of color in upper management, to increase investment into quote-unquote urban communities? We don't want this moment to just go past. And to everybody out there, looting does not honor the dead. The way that we honor George Floyd and Desmond Franklin and Sandra Bland, and Tanisha Anderson, and Timothy Russell, and Melissa Williams, and Breonna Taylor, and all of the countless names. The way that we honor them is by making sure that we create a system that don't lead us back down this path.
Any other questions? Bob?
Actually, yeah, I got a couple for you. There was mention of COVID-19. At this point, and the disparities there, I think 60% of the Cleveland cases are people of color. Yet, you guys haven't had hearings to look into that. At the same time, we're talking about dealing with these disparities and getting to the bottom. Why is that?
Well, that's a good question, and a lot have had to do with COVID-19 itself. We moved towards Zoom committee meetings, and we're doing most of our meetings online. We have been working and talking with the health director on a regular basis in order to get an understanding. The mayor's office has also worked closely, as well as myself, with the governor's office to really try to get an understanding. And we've also reached out to the actual clinics and the healthcare providers to try to urge and make everybody collect data that actually will reflect the race of the cases. A lot of it has to do with people not self-reporting, but I think that that's no excuse. We have to actually try to make an effort to have people report because of the epidemiology of it. Milwaukee, for example, was able to get ahead of this crisis because they recognized, because of the data and the matrix that they put in place to track racism and issues that were disproportionately impacting the African American community, they were able to flag that this crisis was hitting the black community a lot harder in Milwaukee, which means they were able to deploy resources there, do testing, do better tracing. They were able to taper their message to focus focus on that African American community. So that's what we want to try to put the constructs in place in order for us to be able to respond to this faster. But we have been working with all levels of government to get an understanding and to lobby and advocate for the collection of that African American data. I'm not sure if any of my partners who have been following this would like to speak to that as well. Ms. Mitchell?
Just on providing further comment around what the declaring racism as a public health crisis means, we must be clear that we have an amazing amount of data and understand the disproportionality of racism in our communities. And we know, and COVID-19 brings forward how public health intersects with absolutely everything around everyday life. We know that public health has an impact on housing, education, criminal justice system, certainly health, the digital divide, and we see all of that, but it was all there all of the time. So the declaration will give us an opportunity to go into each of those lanes, understand those disparities, and begin the process of looking at those subtle systems that are in place and the way they play out to allow disparities to be able to exist and begin the process of dismantling them. That will come through community involvement, and we certainly will need community oversight, which is a key piece of all of this, to begin to understand how are we doing, how are we measuring ourselves up against this amazing data that shows all of the disproportionality. Disproportionality is nothing but the measure of the impact of racism. When we look at the disproportionality of black babies dying, that is the impact of racism. When we look at the economic impact, that is racism. That is how it is a system. It is systematic. And we certainly do wish there was one banner, one silver bullet, one superhero that could come in. There is not. This is deep, complex work, but there is a roadmap. And Councilman Kelly and Councilman Griffin and Jones and McCormick understand this roadmap and the assets ahead of us to be able to take us on this journey. But it will certainly need the community's resource. But this is this path, this track, we are not out here in the desert. We understand the road and what it will take. And while it is complex, the systems that have brought us here certainly have a deep level of complexity. And so we must respond and are able to respond, willing to respond and can respond, and we are in for the long haul and the long fight.
Bob, just to let you know as well, we are going to be doing the debrief around the COVID-19 crisis. So we are going to be doing a deep dive in that, but I wanted to let you know that there are things that we are presently doing already. And even if you're watching at the national level, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, senators from New Jersey and California, actually put forth some measures that were blocked by Congress, just to show you how all of these institutions are being blocked from moving these kind of policies forward. Yes, Bob, and then gentleman right here. Yes, Bob.
Here's the heart. You've laid out what sounds like a monumental task. And I've heard several people say we don't want this just to be a piece of paper, but it seems like this is going to require some money behind it too. Is there money attached to it now, or do you have a sense of how much it might cost, and where does that come from?
I've been asked that a lot, and I will tell you that once we put the structure together and all of us get together, we'll have that conversation about what is needed in order to make an investment in that. But what I will also tell you though, Bob, is one of the things that I would tell you is he went to the annual meetings of any of these organizations, NAACP, United Way, United Way of Cleveland, Cleveland Foundation. All of them have said that they're making a better commitment towards equity. As my colleague, Councilman Jones, said, we're just trying to tie everything together and now see if people are willing to put resources and commitments behind all of what they're saying as far as a lot of this effort. The city is also going to look at what we might need to do, but at this time, the first step is the academic declaration. Council President?
Thank you, Blaine. I just want to add to that. This is going to cost money. It's going to take resources, but that's what we need to do to make this happen. But we also have to stop thinking about healthcare just as the hospitals in that institution. We need to start thinking about our school systems. We need to make sure that we have grocery stores that people can walk to. We have access to fresh foods. We need to make sure people feel safe in their neighborhoods. Public health is not just whether you have health insurance, whether or not you can go to a hospital. It's the world that we live in, and we have to create those communities if we're really going to beat this. So I just want to, and that will not be free, and that will not be easy.
Let me say that there's no way that America can pay back black people, okay? America cannot pay back 400 years of free labor. You can't do it. What we're asking for is to stop doing the things that's holding us back, right? So if we were to put a dollar amount to how we address racism, you're talking about trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. But what we're asking for within our city, because we can't talk about what's happening in other parts of the country, what can we do in our city? I want everyone to know, for those who are not moved by humanity, if you're not moved by black lives being lost, then understand that racism is costing you money. It's costing you money to not address it. Every time that you fill up these jails and these prisons, that costs money. Every time that we have to give resources to develop programs, this costs money. Every time that we have to bury our black babies, this costs money, right? The therapy that's needed because of the trauma of being black in America. James Baldwin said to be black and conscious in America, to be in constant rage, right? The therapy, this costs money. Every time the police officer shoots and kills someone unjustly, the city has to pay millions of dollars. This costs money. So if you are not moved to address racism because of humanity, then address it based upon the fact that we are losing money every time that a young black man or young black girl is killed unjustly because the city has to pay. You have to pay the family for unjust causes. So remember that. If humanity don't move you, then the dollars will move you. And unfortunately, I want to say this because every organization is imperative and important. And I wonder, would we be having the conversation if what happened downtown would have never occurred? Would you have cared about that? Not you. I'm talking about our cousins and them. Would they have cared about that if the windows wasn't broken and the cars weren't put on fire? So we have to take advantage of this moment. And it's been a beautiful thing to see that this has been a multicultural effort, that this ain't just a black issue. This has been a multicultural effort, and I want to say thank you to everyone out there who are not just African American, but who are Asian and who are white and who are Christians and Muslim and Jewish, who all have come together to say no more, no more, no more. Thank you.
We got one more question? Yes, sir.
For a number of years, we heard it today that Cleveland's #1 in childhood poverty in the nation, and this isn't the first year. It's been #1 for quite some time. What kind of programs does the city of Cleveland have to address childhood poverty, and what percentage of your budget do you spend on addressing childhood poverty?
So there's not a childhood poverty line item, but everything that we do outside of the bread and butter municipal services is for childhood poverty. The money that we are putting towards infant mortality, the money that we put the Department of Health, everything that we do, when we support Cleveland Municipal School District, when we support the county investment that they're doing, there isn't a line item, but the programs that we do for youth, the programs that we do to, may not be called, a poverty line item, but that is kind of the golden thread that runs through the budget, is that's all rooted towards alleviating poverty in the conditions in Cleveland. And the social determinants of health. Thank you.
Just as we just said, the social determinants of health, we have made several investments in our rec centers. We basically have made our rec centers resource centers now. So we have put forth several millions of dollars to really try to focus on that. We do partner with First Year Cleveland, where we put money from the city of Cleveland with them. Listen, sometimes this is about finding the subject matter experts and tying all of the loose ends together. So it's not about the city trying to do it by ourselves. We have several subject matter experts that we fund as well as that they provide funding for in order to try to address some of the issues you're talking about.
Thank you. Sure. One thing. Like this is not, we didn't get to this point because we always got it right. And we have to acknowledge that everyone's anger is justified. But now how do we take this anger and turn it into action? And we need you, sir, and everybody else out there that's tuning in to don't let this just be a moment, but turn it into a movement. Turn it into a movement. Okay? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And if you got follow-up, please follow this as we go. If you have any follow-up questions, please see Joan Mazzolini. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today.